I graduated from UCLA in 1999, and I had spent my junior year abroad at the University of Exeter in England, and I had had some amazing collaborations so anyway, I moved back to England, and I started a theater company there with some collaborators who we had taken a show to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival in 1998, and it had done pretty well, so we started a theater company. We toured it around, and then my working visa was up, so I moved to New York. And so in New York, what I had decided to do, and I don't know where I got this wisdom from, but I just decided to save up enough money to so that I could survive for 2 months without having to worry about getting a job. And I was always like, okay, it's gonna be fine. I can always get a waitressing job or whatever I need to do. And so but what that did was it allowed me to spend 2 months just like really focusing on figuring out what the New York theater scene was, and trying to figure out where I wanted to be in it, where my place was, what the different options were, what the different companies were doing. So I ushered like every single show I possibly could. I went to every free like panel discussion, every free reading I could. I just went everywhere, and I read as much as I possibly could, and that's kind of how I got to know the scene. And actually, it was in that very first week that I was in New York, I went to a panel that was sponsored by Backstage, and it was about starting a theater company in New York City. And I still have the clipping from it, actually, because it's become kind of an important moment in my life, because Susan Burnfield was one of the people who was on the panel. Susan is the artistic director of New George's, and I really just liked what she said. I thought it was really interesting, and it was one of those things where I wanted to go and introduce myself, but I wasn't sure if I should do it. I was kind of nervous. So I gave myself this little thing where I said, okay, if I go and I'm going to go to the bathroom, and if she's still here when I come out, I'm just going to go and introduce myself, and we'll see what happens. And so I went to the bathroom, and I came out, and there she was. She was like the person waiting in line to go to the bathroom, and I like thrust my hand in front of her, and I said, hi, I'm Sarah, I just moved here. And she gave me her card, and she said, come in and meet with me. And I did, and because I had those 2 months just devoted to getting to know the scene, I was able to volunteer for New George's, and that's how I ended up getting my very first like directing gig, doing a 10-minute play, and that's how then I ended up, from there I assistant directed a show, and then I associate production managed a show so that I could learn lots of things, and then I ended up a year and a half later coming on staff, being the person that she asked to hire to be her associate. So it's really hard to get a job. I think that in the arts you kind of have to make it happen for yourself, especially if you're committed to doing the work that you want to do. And I think as a director, you just have to be directing, and that's the only way anyone is going to ever want you, is you have to be able to show your work. And it's really hard because you do a show and then you like beg people to come, and if they don't come, then you have to do a whole nother show to get them to come. So it's hard, but I think stuff does build over time. But I feel like I feel very lucky. I remember actually before I moved to New York, somebody said, okay, you're either going to end up having a job that you hate, and then you're going to do your theater on the side, or you're going to somehow like find a way and you're going to end up working in administration for a company, and then you're going to be bitter because you're an administrator instead of an artist. And I was like, well, those don't sound like very good options, like neither of them. But and I had no idea that like where I like really didn't know what my path would be. When I got to New York, I called everyone who was a friend of a friend, and I think that you have some leeway. You have like 6 months, maybe a year, when you first move to New York, where you can call just about anyone who is a distant connection and say, hey, I'm a theater artist and I just moved to New York, and would you give me some advice? Can I take you out for coffee? and pick your brain. And you can do it. Yeah, so I totally did that. So that's how Susan was somebody who I met by just attending something, but then everything else that happened, I worked at the O'Neill my first summer in New York, up at the O'Neill Playwrights Conference. I worked at the Cherry Lane for a year, and that all happened because I found a moment where I was bold enough to pick up the phone and call someone random. And I think of it now and I'm like, wow, I was so gutsy. How do I, and now as, in my 30s, I'm like, wow, I wish I felt the freedom that I did when I was 23 and I moved here. I think that, because that's, especially in the downtown theater culture, there's so much of that. Everyone, you just need hands on deck. So if you're willing to come and, pay your dues and learn the ropes by just being around and helping out, you're gonna find opportunities. You're gonna find people who are really willing to have you, and they will teach you. And that's just, it's kind of like the way, it's the way that the culture works, I think, at the downtown theater. So my title at New George's at the beginning was managing director, because Susan just plastered that on me. And which is hilarious, because I didn't have any training as a management person. I'm self-taught QuickBooks person, and then eventually, actually, it was an agent who told me, if you're a director and you're serious about directing, that should not be your title, because you're not a management person, first and foremost. And I'm really lucky, and so that's when we actually changed my title to be associate director, and because it then has the artistic part is implied. What happened was that once I started doing bigger gigs, or I started producing on the level, I probably spent 4 years doing kind of smaller shows here and there, and with no budgets. There was my friend Jeff Horn at Spring Theater Works. He was very influential for me in terms of just he had space and he would allow me to do whatever I wanted. But then in 2004 was when I first started self-producing, and on a scale that was based on how I knew how to produce for New George's. And that's when it was a turning point for me, because I started getting attention in a different way, and everyone kind of knew then that I was a director. In 2003, I went to Norway, because my family is Norwegian, and I saw for the first time there was this amazing playwright named Jon Fosse, who was coming out of Norway, who had been done in countries all over the world. He had been produced all over the world, but he had never been done in the United States before. And with his plays, I was just blown away. I kind of knew right away. I was like, oh, he's different, and and it was one of those things where I read the play, I went to see a production he's written over 40 plays, but I read this particular play, saw the production at the National Theater that night, came home, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have a vision, I'm going to be the first person to do this work in the United States. And it was this kind of I have a dream moment, but and it wasn't until 6 months later that I actually started acting on it, but I remember that impulse, and then it was because I shared it with a couple people, and they were like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then I ended up writing to him. I just wrote to him and I said, hey, I'm this Norwegian American, and I want to do your plays in New York, and here's the one I want to do first, and blah, blah, blah. And that ended up turning into a real passion for his work, but also translation, because the art of translation. I just became really taken with the idea of translation and what it is, and how you move action from one culture into another culture. And I became very adamant about taking time to do that process. It's not, you cannot put something into a computer and have it come out and translate it. There is no such thing as a literal translation. And okay, so last year I was working at the Guthrie Theater with a bunch of the BFA students. They were doing their final piece in the Guthrie Theater. It was very exciting. And I was giving some talks about what it is to have a career. And there was this moment where I was kind of talking about what I did and what my path was, and I was like, oh my gosh, I've done something. And it was like this it was kind of an incredible moment, because I don't think until then I really had never felt like, oh, I know things. I mean, you know things and you learn things, and I sometimes in rehearsal will be like, oh yeah, I do know how to do this, but you always feel like there's more to know and you don't know anything. And so there was just this moment, I remember talking to these eager, wonderful 22-year-olds, and I realized that, oh yeah, in my last 10 years I've actually accomplished something. If I could change one thing, I would try to really focus on collaboration and loyalty to collaboration, and how if we as a community nurture like, theater's not created by one person alone in a room ever. It's a live art form, and so it's created by a group of people, 2 or more usually, and so I think I would try to really honor those collaborations, from the smallest, tiniest little thing that's happening experimentally somewhere to the highest level, because I think that sometimes we get caught up in a name or in the money or in something that is not the core of why we're doing it, the core of